Chapter 1. The Invitation. It was a late autumn evening when I received the letter. The rain had been falling for hours, a steady, relentless downpour that washed the streets clean, turning them into a blurry gray canvas. I had just finished a long shift at the coffee shop, the kind of night where the smell of espresso and pastries still lingered on my clothes as I locked up and made my way home. My apartment was small but cozy, just enough for me to feel safe. Or at least it had been. When I opened the door, I was greeted with an unexpected sight. A thick, cream-colored envelope sitting on the floor, right where the mat should have been. There was no return address, just my name written in bold, elegant script across the front. Lucy Calloway. The paper felt expensive between my fingers as I slid the letter out. The weight of it, the gold-embossed seal on the back, everything about it screamed importance. My heart skipped a beat. There was something about the envelope that unsettled me, something that whispered of secrets I wasn't ready to know. I unfolded the letter, my fingers trembling slightly as I read. Dear Lucy Calloway, you are cordially invited to a private gathering hosted by Mr. Nicholas Blackwood at his residence. The evening promises to be unforgettable, filled with intriguing company, exquisite food, and conversation that could change your life. Arrive at 7:30 p.m. sharp. Formal attire is required. Yours sincerely, Elena Hawke, Event Coordinator. I stared at the letter for a moment, my mind racing. Nicholas Blackwood. The name was vaguely familiar, though I couldn't place it. My fingers gripped the paper tighter, and a strange curiosity took root. I wasn't the type to attend lavish parties or exclusive gatherings. My life had always been simple, quiet, uneventful. But this felt different, dangerous even. But why me? The more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. Who was Nicholas Blackwood, and why had he chosen me? I glanced at the clock. It was already past 6. The invitation mentioned arriving at 7:30 p.m., and that didn't give me much time to figure out what the hell was going on. The letter felt like a riddle, like a door being opened into a world I had no business entering. But the feeling of being drawn into something larger than myself was undeniable. I couldn't resist. Chapter 2. The Blackwood Mansion. I stood in front of the mirror, my fingers smoothing over the dress that clung to my body, a deep emerald green that contrasted against my pale skin. The satin fabric shimmered under the dim light, and I was unsure whether it was a perfect fit or just too much for someone like me. I wasn't used to wearing such luxurious clothing, and for a moment I questioned my decision. But something inside me kept pushing, urging me to see this through, to find out what this all meant. A glance at the clock told me I didn't have much time left. My heart raced in anticipation, and a small part of me wondered whether I was making a huge mistake. I had no idea what to expect at the Blackwood Mansion. The letter hadn't offered any further details, leaving me to stew in curiosity and anxiety. My phone buzzed, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was a message from my best friend, Sam. Are you sure about this? I stared at the screen for a moment, her words echoing the very doubt I'd been battling since receiving the invitation. Sam was the practical one in our friendship, always the first to tell me to stay grounded. But I knew if I told her about this, she'd probably insist I throw the letter away and stay home with a cup of tea. She never quite understood my urge to push beyond the ordinary. I'm going, I typed back, my fingers trembling as I hit send. I'll let you know how it goes. I took one last look at myself before grabbing my coat and purse. I had already made my decision. No turning back now. The Blackwood Mansion was on the outskirts of town, perched on a hill that overlooked the city. It was the kind of place that seemed to belong in a historical novel. Massive, intimidating, and vaguely otherworldly. The winding road leading up to it was framed by tall iron gates that looked as if they hadn't been opened in decades. The mansion itself stood at the end of a long, winding driveway, its dark stone exterior looming ominously against the pale, moonlit sky. When I finally arrived, the gates creaked open with an eerie sound, as though the house itself were beckoning me inside. I parked my car in front of the mansion, feeling like an intruder in a world that wasn't mine. My hands shook as I pulled myself together, trying to push away the gnawing feeling in my stomach. It didn't help that there were no other cars in sight. Had I been mistaken? Had they forgotten about me? Or was everyone else already inside, already part of whatever game I had unwittingly entered? But then the door of the mansion opened, and out stepped a woman. She was tall, with sharp features and dark, flowing hair that shimmered like midnight. She wore a black dress that was as elegant as it was severe, her gaze piercing as she approached my car with the precision of a predator. "Miss Calloway," she said, her voice smooth and commanding. "I've been expecting you." I swallowed, stepping out of the car, feeling very small in her presence. I wasn't sure if I had the right place," I admitted, still trying to grasp what was happening. She gave a small, knowing smile, but there was no warmth in it. "You have the right place. Please follow me. The others are waiting." I didn't argue. It was clear I had no other choice. As we entered the mansion, the weight of the place hit me like a physical force. The high ceilings, the dark wood paneling, the marble floors that gleamed under the low light. All of it was designed to overwhelm, to make you feel like you were trespassing in a world that wasn't meant for you. The air was thick with something I couldn't identify. It wasn't just luxury or wealth. There was a palpable tension in the air, like every corner of the mansion held secrets. "Mr. Blackwood is in the study," the woman said, leading me through the grand hallway. Her heels clicked on the floor with an eerie rhythm, echoing through the empty space. "He's been expecting your arrival." "Mr. Blackwood," I murmured, the name now feeling more like a mystery I was itching to solve. "Yes," she replied with a flick of her hand, as though the name itself was of no particular importance to her. "He's quite selective about who he invites. I trust you'll find him." Interesting. The word seemed too mild to describe what I was about to walk into. The study was at the end of a long corridor, its doors grand and imposing, but they were open just enough to let the warmth from inside spill out. As we reached the threshold, I could see him, Nicholas Blackwood, standing by a grand fireplace, his silhouette outlined by the dancing flames. He was tall, with dark hair that was a little too messy to be considered neat, but that only added to his charm. His face was sharply handsome, like someone who had stepped out of an old black-and-white movie. He didn't turn when we entered, but I could feel his gaze shift toward me, as if he knew I was there even before I had made a sound. The woman beside me cleared her throat, and he finally turned to face us. His eyes were a striking shade of blue, cold and calculating but also curiously warm, as if hiding something just beneath the surface. He studied me for a moment, as though deciding whether or not I was worth his time. "You must be Miss Calloway," he said, his voice low and rich, the kind of voice that seemed to wrap around you like silk. "Please come in. I trust you've had no trouble finding your way here." I nodded, stepping into the room, trying to keep my composure. "No, it wasn't hard to find." "Good," he said, his lips curling into a faint smile. "I do hope you're ready for what's to come." I wasn't sure if I was ready for anything, but there was no turning back now. Nicholas Blackwood's study was everything I imagined it would be. Luxurious, but not in a flashy, showy way. There was a heavy elegance to the room, with shelves lined with leather-bound books, deep mahogany furniture, and thick velvet curtains that draped the tall windows. A grand fireplace crackled softly on the far side of the room, its flames casting flickering shadows that seemed to dance along the walls. "Please sit," Nicholas said, gesturing toward a plush armchair in front of his desk. His tone was casual, but his eyes never left mine, watching me as I slowly made my way into the room, unsure of what to expect. The woman who had greeted me at the door, Elena I remembered, stood near the door, her posture rigid and her gaze unwavering. There was something unsettling about her, something that made my skin crawl, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I could feel her eyes boring into me as I sat down, a silent observer to everything happening around me. Nicholas finally broke his gaze from me and turned to the bar beside the fireplace. With a swift motion, he poured a drink. Whiskey, I assumed, into a crystal glass before slowly walking over and offering it to me. "Would you care for something to drink?" he asked, his voice smooth and calm, as though this was all a routine. I hesitated. Something about him felt too calm, too practiced. But I didn't want to seem rude, so I accepted, my fingers brushing against the cool glass as he handed it to me. "No, thank you," I said softly, taking a small sip. The burn of the alcohol was a welcome distraction, but it only heightened my awareness of the tension in the room. Nicholas took a seat across from me, his eyes never leaving mine as he studied me intently. There was something magnetic about him, something that made it hard to look away, even though I wanted to. It wasn't attraction, not exactly, but a strange pull that seemed to demand my full attention. "So," he said, leaning forward slightly, "tell me about yourself, Lucy. How does someone like you end up at my doorstep?" The question was direct, almost too direct, but I knew better than to show hesitation. I wasn't here to be timid. "I'm just an ordinary person," I replied, my voice steady. "I don't know why you invited me, but I'm here. So, what is it that you want?" Nicholas smiled, and it wasn't a comforting smile. It was the kind of smile that made you question his intentions. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his drink before taking a slow sip, savoring it like he was toying with me. "You've been curious about me, haven't you?" he asked, his tone soft but pointed. "Curious about this place? About why you're here?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The air felt thick with unspoken words, each one hanging between us like a heavy weight. "I've been watching you, Lucy," he continued, his voice growing quieter, more intimate. "I've been watching you for quite some time. You're different from the others." "Others?" I echoed, trying to suppress the flutter of panic rising in my chest. Nicholas's smile deepened, but there was no warmth in it. "Yes, others. People like you, people who have something to offer but don't even know it yet. People who are waiting for a change." The words he spoke sent a chill down my spine. My heart began to pound in my chest, the room suddenly feeling too small, too confining. What was he talking about? What did he mean by something to offer? He stood up, walking slowly toward the window, his back to me. "I brought you here because you're part of something bigger than yourself. You don't know it yet, but you will soon. This is more than just an invitation to a party, Lucy. It's a test." I blinked, confusion clouding my thoughts. "A test?" "Yes," he replied, turning to face me. The flickering firelight made his features appear sharp and almost otherworldly. "A test of character. Test of trust. And, ultimately, a test of survival." I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I had never been this unsettled in my life, and it felt like my entire world was slowly tilting in a direction I couldn't control. "You see," Nicholas continued, "you've been chosen to participate in something that has been running for generations. Something that is essential. The people who walk through these doors are not like others. They are part of a carefully curated group, each one with their own unique skill, knowledge, or how should I say it, potential. You, Lucy, you have potential." I felt a lump form in my throat. "What do you want from me?" "Don't worry," Nicholas said, his voice light, as though he were reassuring a child. "It's not what you think. You're not in danger. Not yet, at least. But I do expect you to play the game." "The game?" The words echoed in my mind like a sinister whisper. I wanted to demand more answers, to tell him I didn't know what he was talking about, but a small part of me knew I was already in too deep. I couldn't turn back now. "Elena," Nicholas said suddenly without looking at her, "show Lucy to her room. She'll need rest for what's to come." Without waiting for a response, Elena moved toward the door. Her eyes flickered to me, and for a moment I thought I saw something else in her gaze, something not entirely human. I quickly stood, my body moving on instinct as I followed her out of the study. "Right this way," Elena said, her voice a little too soft, too practiced. "The evening is just beginning." As I walked down the long hallway behind her, the weight of the mansion seemed to grow heavier with every step. What had I gotten myself into? Chapter 4, The First Night. Elena led me down a narrow, dimly lit hallway, her footsteps making no sound as they echoed through the high-ceilinged corridor. The walls, adorned with portraits of unknown people in antique frames, seemed to watch me, their eyes cold and distant. The mansion, though grand and beautiful, was starting to feel more like a prison with every step I took. We arrived at a door at the end of the hall, and Elena pushed it open without a word. The room was just as grand as the rest of the house, with a massive four-poster bed draped in heavy velvet curtains, thick carpets that muffled the sound of my steps, and a large bay window overlooking the gardens below. The soft glow of candlelight filled the space, casting long shadows across the walls. "This is your room for the evening," Elena said flatly, her expression unreadable. "Tomorrow we will begin." "Begin what?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop myself. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, her eyes lingered on me, cold and calculating. I shifted uncomfortably under her gaze, unsure whether she was appraising me or simply deciding how to respond. "You'll find out soon enough," she said finally, her tone clipped. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be important." She left the room with a single swift motion, leaving me alone in the vast, unfamiliar space. The door clicked shut behind her with a finality that made my skin crawl. I walked to the window and looked out at the sprawling gardens below, shrouded in mist. The mansion sat like a dark sentinel on the hill, its towering presence dominating the landscape. Somewhere out there, hidden behind the walls and secrets, was the truth. And tomorrow, Nicholas had promised, I would find it. I let out a deep breath, trying to calm the racing thoughts in my head. The whiskey I'd sipped earlier still burned in the back of my throat, but it did little to ease the anxiety bubbling inside me. What had I gotten myself into? The bed was too inviting, too soft, but I resisted the urge to sink into it, knowing I wouldn't sleep, not tonight. Not with everything swirling around me, unanswered questions clawing at my mind. I walked around the room instead, inspecting the small details, the antique dresser with its ornate carvings, the large bookshelf filled with leather-bound volumes I couldn't even begin to understand. Everything in this place felt carefully crafted to put me on edge, to make me feel small and insignificant in the face of something much larger than myself. My eyes landed on a door at the far end of the room. It was slightly ajar, revealing a small hallway beyond. Curiosity tugged at me, the need to explore, no to understand, pushing me forward. I approached the door cautiously, my fingers brushing against the cool, smooth wood. The hallway on the other side was dark, save for a few faint beams of light from sconces hanging on the walls. I hesitated, wondering if I should turn back and obey the simple instructions to rest. But there was something in me, something that had been awakened by this place, that refused to ignore the pull to discover more. I stepped into the hallway, my heart beating faster as I crept through the darkened corridors. The mansion seemed alive with whispers, its creaks and groans almost like a living, breathing entity, watching my every move. As I wandered deeper into the mansion, I passed a few rooms, each one more extravagant than the last, but all eerily silent. I kept expecting someone to jump out at me or for someone to tell me to go back to my room, but no one appeared. The only sound was the soft tapping of my heels on the marble floors and the faint rustling of fabric as my dress brushed against my legs. It wasn't until I reached a set of grand double doors that I stopped in my tracks. The doors were slightly ajar, and a soft, warm light spilled out into the hallway, illuminating the darkened space. A low murmur of voices drifted through the crack, and I instinctively stepped closer to listen. "What does she know?" A voice, familiar and smooth, spoke from the other side. "Nicholas." "She doesn't know anything yet," another voice replied. It was Elena. Her tone was cold, almost dismissive. "But she will. She's already begun to prove useful." "Is she ready?" Nicholas asked, his voice low, almost inaudible. "Not yet," Elena replied. "But she'll play her part. She always does." I felt a chill run down my spine at her words. Play her part. What did that mean? Was I some kind of puppet in their game? I stepped back, heart hammering in my chest. They were talking about me. But what were they planning? What was my part? And why was I being dragged into whatever twisted game they were playing? I wanted to retreat, to return to my room and lock myself away. But something in me, something darker and more curious than fear, urged me forward. I needed to know more. I had to understand what was happening here. I took a deep breath and slowly pushed the doors open, the sound of the hinges creaking in protest. Inside, the room was a large, well-lit parlor with dark, velvet chairs and a low fire crackling in the hearth. There were two people inside, Nicholas and Elena. And as I stepped into the room, their eyes turned toward me in unison, sharp and piercing. "You shouldn't be here," Elena said, her voice suddenly cold and hard. Nicholas, on the other hand, didn't seem upset at all. Instead, his lips curved into that same enigmatic smile. "It seems our guest is more curious than we anticipated." I stood frozen at the threshold, unsure of what to say or do. My heart pounded in my chest, and every instinct screamed at me to run, to escape whatever web they were weaving around me. But Nicholas only stepped closer, his eyes never leaving mine. "You were always going to be part of this, Lucy," he said softly, almost as if speaking to himself. "And now, you've seen just a glimpse of what's to come." The room felt colder, darker, as if the very air had shifted around me. I had no idea what he meant, but something told me I wasn't going to be able to walk away from this, whatever this was. "I suggest you go back to your room now," Elena said, her voice edged with something more dangerous. "Before you learn more than you're ready for." I turned to leave, my legs shaking as I retreated back down the hall. But just before the door clicked shut behind me, I heard Nicholas's voice again, low and haunting. "Tomorrow, Lucy. Tomorrow the real game begins." Chapter 5. The Invitation. The next morning the mansion felt different. The oppressive weight of the night seemed to hang over everything like a dark cloud, but the morning light spilling through the windows tried to push it away. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had entered a world that wasn't my own, one that held secrets, dangerous secrets, that I was only beginning to scratch the surface of. The clock on the wall ticked away in the background, its steady rhythm a reminder that time was moving forward, that today I would learn more, or perhaps get swept up in whatever game Nicholas Blackwood and his mysterious associates were playing. When I stepped into the hallway, I was met by Elena once again. She stood motionless, her eyes locked onto mine as if she'd been waiting for me all along. There was no warmth in her gaze, just that sharp, calculating look that made me feel like I was a puzzle piece she was attempting to fit into place. "Mr. Blackwood is waiting for you," she said simply, her voice devoid of emotion. "Follow me." I didn't question her. There was no use in doing so. Instead, I walked silently behind her, down the familiar long corridors, past the portraits that now seemed to watch me more intently than before. Each step felt heavier, each breath seemed to carry more weight, as though the mansion was aware of my every move. We reached a large circular room that I hadn't seen the night before. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with old books, trinkets, and strange artifacts. The center of the room was dominated by a massive round table, its surface made of polished, dark stone. There were 4 chairs around it, each one as lavish and imposing as the room itself. At the table sat Nicholas Blackwood. He was alone, his fingers drumming rhythmically on the stone surface. His gaze focused on something in front of him, though it wasn't clear what. His dark eyes flickered up to meet mine as I entered, and that same unsettling smile appeared on his lips. "Lucy, I'm glad you could join us," he said smoothly, his voice like velvet. I didn't sit immediately. Instead, I stood there, unsure of what to do or how to react. I had no choice but to walk forward, to let whatever was happening here play out, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to be pulled even deeper into a world that wasn't mine to understand. "Please take a seat," Nicholas gestured to the empty chair across from him. His movements were casual, almost like we were 2 old friends catching up over coffee, but I knew better than to mistake his demeanor for something benign. I hesitated for a moment, then took the seat opposite him. The coolness of the stone beneath my palms did little to calm the rush of adrenaline coursing through my veins. There was a strange energy in the air, a palpable tension that felt like a live wire waiting to snap. "Do you know why you're here, Lucy?" Nicholas asked, his voice steady, unbothered. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes locked onto mine, studying me. "I've been wondering that myself," I replied, trying to maintain my composure, though the nerves that clawed at my insides were threatening to spill out. "You said something about a game, but I still don't know what it is." Nicholas chuckled softly, the sound dark and amused. "Ah yes, the game. The test of character, the trial if you will. It's not something everyone is suited for. But I believe you are." He frowned. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, his gaze never leaving mine. "I've chosen you, Lucy. I've watched you for a long time. You have something within you, something rare. A resilience, a curiosity that can't be easily stifled. Makes you useful. And I need people like you." My heart skipped a beat, and my throat went dry. "Useful for what?" Nicholas smiled, his lips curling just slightly. "That's what we'll find out together. You see, I don't just invite anyone to this house. The people who come here, whether they realize it or not, are part of something much larger. Something centuries old, built on trust, loyalty, and a very specific set of skills. Everyone here has a role to play. And soon you will discover yours." I felt my chest tighten. "What happens if I don't want to play along?" He raised an eyebrow, and his smile deepened, becoming more mysterious. "Oh, Lucy, that's the beauty of it. You won't have to make that decision. You've already made it. Whether you know it or not, you're already part of the game. It's just a matter of whether or not you'll be good enough to succeed." I felt a chill at his words, and for a brief moment, I wondered just how far I had gone by stepping into this mansion, this web of intrigue, manipulation, and dark promises. The idea of leaving crossed my mind, but something held me in place. Was it fear? Curiosity? Or was it simply the fact that I knew there was no escaping now? I swallowed hard, forcing myself to speak through the knot in my throat. "And if I don't succeed?" Nicholas's eyes sparkled with something I couldn't quite name: excitement, satisfaction. "Then you'll fail. But that's part of the process. Everyone who plays has their chance, Lucy. It's all about finding your place in the game." I could feel the weight of his words sinking in. There was no way out, no easy escape. And the more I resisted, the more I knew I was bound to this place, to these people, to whatever dark purpose they had in mind for me. He stood up suddenly, and I followed his movement with my eyes. The change in his demeanor was subtle but distinct, like a predator who had just spotted its prey. "I've set things in motion," Nicholas said, his voice cold and final. "Tonight we'll begin the first part of your training. You will learn the rules of the game. And you will decide whether you're worthy of the challenges ahead." Before I could speak, he turned away, his footsteps echoing in the vast room. "Elena will escort you to the preparation chamber. Be ready. Tonight will be the first test." The weight of his words hung in the air like a thick fog, and I was left there, motionless, as the door clicked shut behind him. I wasn't sure what was happening or why I had been chosen, but one thing was clear. This game, whatever it was, had already begun. Chapter 6. The Preparation. The hallway was silent as Elena led me deeper into the mansion, her pace swift and deliberate, each step echoing in the emptiness of the large, cold space. My mind raced with thoughts of what was to come, but every time I tried to focus on a single thread, it unraveled, revealing only more questions. "Elena," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "what exactly is going to happen tonight?" She didn't respond at first. Her face remained a mask of indifference, but I could feel her eyes flicker to me for a brief moment, as though gauging my level of understanding or perhaps even my nerves. Finally, she spoke, her voice low, almost as though she were speaking to herself. "You'll see," she said, her tone clipped. "All in good time." I wasn't sure whether her words were meant to comfort me or just dismiss my questions, but they did neither. The silence that followed felt oppressive, the weight of whatever was looming ahead pressing on my chest like an invisible hand. We arrived at a large wooden door at the end of the hall, its surface intricately carved with symbols and designs that made no sense to me. The door was a contrast to everything I had seen before, unassuming yet somehow ominous. Elena stopped in front of it and turned toward me. "Behind this door is where the first test will begin," she said, her expression unreadable. "What happens in there is up to you." I swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. I wanted to protest, to demand more answers, but the words caught in my throat. I was already here, already so far beyond the point of no return. Without another word, Elena opened the door and stepped aside, motioning for me to enter. I hesitated, the room behind the door concealed by shadows, but finally, I gathered the courage to step inside. The room was dimly lit, but the soft glow of candles along the walls revealed a stark contrast to the opulence of the rest of the mansion. This room was more utilitarian: bare stone walls, an unadorned floor, and a single chair in the center, facing a large mirror. The air was thick with the scent of something unfamiliar, something sharp, and as I took in the room, I felt an unease settle deep within my bones. Elena stepped in after me, and the door closed behind us with a soft thud, trapping me inside the strange, cold space. "Sit," she ordered, her voice firm. I didn't argue. I moved toward the chair, my mind spinning with uncertainty, and took a seat. The chair felt unnaturally cold against my skin, like it had been waiting for me. The mirror in front of me was large, almost intimidating, and I couldn't help but wonder what I was supposed to see when I looked into it. "Elena," I said, my voice breaking through the tension, "what is this place? What am I supposed to do?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she moved to a small table on the side of the room, where a variety of vials and instruments lay neatly arranged. I couldn't make out exactly what they were, but the sight of them only added to my unease. "Tonight," Elena said, her voice almost a whisper, "you'll face your first choice. What happens here is a reflection of your willingness to trust the game. You must prove you're ready to play." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Trust the game. What game? She picked up a small vial filled with a clear liquid and turned toward me, her expression unreadable. "This will test your resolve, Lucy. It's simple. Either you take the chance or you refuse. The consequences will be yours to bear." My heart raced in my chest as she approached, her steps slow and deliberate. There was a strange, almost hypnotic quality to her movements, and despite myself, I couldn't look away. "What is it?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Elena," she repeated, as though she hadn't heard me, "this is part of the game. You will be asked to face your fears, your deepest uncertainties. This liquid," she held the vial up, its contents shimmering faintly in the candlelight, "will make you see things you can't unsee. It will show you the truth. Your truth." I didn't understand. Truth. What was she talking about? This wasn't what I had expected when I came here. There had been no mention of tests like this, no warnings about what might come. "You need to make a choice," Elena said, her voice growing colder. "Will you face the truth, or will you run?" For a moment, I could only stare at the vial, at the way the liquid swirled inside as though it were alive. What did it mean to face the truth? Was it really the truth I wanted to see? I felt like I was drowning in the uncertainty of it all. The walls felt like they were closing in around me, and the mirror in front of me seemed to mock me with its silent, reflective gaze. "What happens if I don't take it?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Elena's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Then you'll leave, and the game will be over for you. But I don't think you'll walk away so easily. You'll see things here, Lucy. You'll learn things about yourself, about people, and when you do, you won't want to leave." I could feel her words pressing down on me, heavy with meaning, but I couldn't understand. This game, whatever it was, had already started, and it seemed like there was no escaping it. No matter how much I wanted to run, to scream, to stop everything, I couldn't. The pull was too strong, the curiosity far too compelling. With shaking hands, I reached out and took the vial from her, the cold glass sending a shiver up my spine. Elena's eyes remained on me as I uncorked it, the scent of something sharp and metallic filling the air as I held the vial up to the candlelight. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the world around me blurring as I stared at the liquid. I had to make a choice. There was no turning back. Low. Chapter 7, The Mirror's Truth. The liquid burned as it slid down my throat, leaving a trail of icy fire in its wake. My mouth went dry, and I felt my body tense as if it was bracing for something unimaginable. I swallowed, but the burning sensation didn't fade. It lingered, spreading through me like liquid ice, freezing me from the inside out. For a moment nothing happened. I blinked, staring at Elena, who stood still, her eyes never leaving mine. I was waiting for some kind of immediate reaction, some sign that I had made a terrible mistake. But then the room around me seemed to shift, slowly at first, like the world was changing its shape in response to something unseen. The mirror in front of me started to ripple, the reflection distorting as though the glass itself was alive. My heart raced as I leaned forward, unable to tear my gaze away. In the mirror I saw myself. At first that was all it was. But then, something changed. The version of me in the reflection was different. Her eyes were wide, terrified, filled with a fear I hadn't felt until now. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to speak but couldn't. She reached out a hand as though trying to warn me, but no sound came from her mouth. Suddenly I heard a voice. My voice, but it was not the one I had just used. It was muffled, distant, like it was coming from behind a veil. "Run." The word was a whisper, barely audible, but it sent a jolt through my entire body. My reflection was still, but the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. It was the same fear I had felt when I first entered this place, when I had seen the mansion, the strangers, and realized I wasn't in control. I turned toward Elena, hoping for some sort of explanation, but she stood motionless, watching me with an unreadable expression. "What's happening?" I gasped, the words barely escaping my throat. My hands shook as I tried to steady myself, my heart hammering in my chest. Elena's lips parted slightly, but it wasn't a comforting gesture. It was cold, calculating. "You're seeing the truth now," she said, her voice low, like she was speaking to someone who didn't understand the rules of the game. "What you fear most. It's all here, Lucy. You can't hide from it anymore. The question is, can you face it?" The reflection in the mirror shifted again. This time it wasn't just my face staring back. There were figures behind me, shadows at first, but as the mirror warped, they took shape. The first shadow materialized into a figure I knew well, my mother. But this was not the woman I remembered. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow, as though some part of her had long since faded away. Her lips moved, but again no sound came from her. Then there was someone else, stepping out of the dark shadows in the mirror. My father. His face was twisted in anger, his eyes burning with accusation. The air in the room felt heavier, more oppressive, as though their presence, these images, were suffocating me. And then, the next figure appeared. My husband, Daniel. His face was the last one I expected to see. The image of him stood before me in the mirror. His eyes soft, yet filled with a sorrow I didn't understand. I froze, my heart stopping in my chest. His lips moved, and I finally heard him speak. "Why did you leave me?" The words felt like a dagger to my chest. The pain of them, so raw, so true, was more than I could bear. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to comprehend what I was seeing. The reflection of Daniel in the mirror wasn't just a memory. It wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was real somehow. The truth. The truth was being revealed to me in ways I couldn't process, through faces I hadn't seen in years, through the questions I never dared ask. My eyes burned with tears, but I refused to blink. I couldn't look away. The reflection was changing again. Flashes of memories long buried, wounds I had never healed. Daniel's face blurred, and suddenly another image appeared. "You've betrayed him." The voice was colder this time, harsher. My heart raced as I turned back to Elena, My breath shallow and panicked. The weight of those words, "You've betrayed him," hung in the air like a threat. A truth I had never fully acknowledged. "You've done this to yourself," Elena said, her words sharp and cutting, as if she were simply an observer of my unraveling. "It's your choice whether you acknowledge it. But remember, Lucy, the game does not forgive." I couldn't breathe. The room closed in on me as the mirror shifted again, the faces fading, leaving behind only the dark emptiness that threatened to swallow me whole. I turned away from the mirror, stumbling back, my legs weak. "What am I supposed to do?" I gasped, my voice trembling. "You're already doing it," Elena replied, her voice oddly calm in the midst of the storm swirling inside me. "You've taken the first step, Lucy. The game will show you everything, if you're willing to face it." But the truth had already shattered me. Faces, questions, the betrayals I had buried in the deepest corners of my mind. They were all here, staring back at me. My own reflection had turned into a monster, a reminder of everything I had run from, everything I had done to try to escape. And now there was no escaping this. "Can I stop the game?" I asked, my voice breaking. Elena's cold gaze met mine, and for the first time, I saw something like pity in her eyes. "No one ever stops the game, Lucy," she said softly. "The game plays you." I took a step back, my hands trembling as I struggled to breathe through the fear that was building inside me. The cold, oppressive weight of this mansion, the truth that had been laid bare, pressed down harder with every passing second. And then, as I turned to leave, I saw something in the reflection one last time. An image of me standing alone in the dark. The game had already begun. Chapter 8. The Descent. The door slammed shut behind me, and the sound reverberated through the cold, empty halls. My heart was pounding in my chest, a rhythm that seemed to echo throughout the mansion as I stumbled away from the room. I had no idea where I was going, but all I knew was that I couldn't stay there any longer. The mirror had shown me things I wasn't ready to confront, and now I was drowning in the aftermath. The walls around me seemed to close in as I moved through the corridors, the mansion feeling larger, more oppressive. The grand doors, the chandeliers, the portraits on the walls, all of it had taken on a menacing quality. There was no warmth left here, no refuge. Every step I took, I could feel the weight of the truth pressing down harder, suffocating me. I stopped in front of a large window, the heavy curtains drawn back to reveal the dark, sprawling grounds outside. The night was deepening, and the garden below was shrouded in shadows. The mansion seemed to rise up from the earth, a dark sentinel watching over everything. And yet, in that moment, I felt smaller, more insignificant than I ever had in my life. The image of Daniel in the mirror haunted me. His voice, the sorrow in his eyes, had ripped through me like a blade. My chest tightened as I tried to push away the feelings that rushed to the surface. The guilt, the shame. Could I even forgive myself for what I had done? What I hadn't done? "Lucy." The sound of Nicholas's voice snapped me out of my spiral. I hadn't heard him approach, but there he stood, as always, looming in the shadows like a figure made of darkness himself. His presence was magnetic, impossible to ignore. He seemed to glide effortlessly toward me, the light catching his sharp features just enough to make them look even more predatory. "I see you're taking everything in," he said, his voice smooth, as though nothing had happened, as though the truth he had forced me to face didn't matter. "What have you done to me?" I whispered, my voice broken. I couldn't look at him. I couldn't bear the sight of his calm, unshaken expression, while I was falling apart inside. Nicholas's smile was slow, almost indulgent. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, his shoes making no sound on the polished floor. "Nothing that you didn't already do to yourself, Lucy," he replied softly, his words cold and calculating. "All I did was show you the mirror, the reflection that's always been there. You are your own tormentor." I shook my head, unwilling to accept the weight of his words. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't come here to face this." He stepped even closer, his presence a looming force I couldn't escape. "You didn't need to ask." You're here because you already knew deep down that you would eventually have to face it. You've been running from the truth for so long, Lucy. You can't even see how far you've fallen into the game. The only question that remains now is whether you'll choose to play." I backed away, my breath coming faster, the panic rising inside me. I didn't sign up for this. I didn't come here to be manipulated. To be used. Nicholas's eyes flashed, his expression turning more serious, though there was still a cold amusement in his gaze. But you see, you're already here. You've already started. That's the thing with games, Lucy. They don't ask for consent. They just happen. The sooner you realize that, the sooner you can stop running." The words hit me like a slap. I had thought I could leave at any time, that I could walk out the door and never return. But I was trapped. The mansion, the people here, the game. It was all a part of something much bigger than I could understand, something I wasn't ready to accept. "What happens now?" I asked, barely able to control my voice. It trembled with a mixture of fear and anger. "What do you want from me?" Nicholas's lips curled into a knowing smile. "I want you to make a choice. To decide whether you'll accept the game or walk away, knowing that if you do, there's no coming back. Simple, really. There are rules, Lucy. You'll either follow them or you won't. But every action has a consequence." My mind raced. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, to get out of this place that had become a prison for my mind. But deep down, I knew that the door I'd entered hadn't just been a physical one. It had been a threshold into something far darker. And now I couldn't escape. Not without facing the truth that was so tightly wound around me. Nicholas took a step back, giving me space to breathe, but his gaze never left mine. "You've been tested. Now it's time for the next step. If you choose to continue, the consequences will only get more intense." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking into my gut like a stone. There was no running, no easy way out. Whatever this was, whatever this game had become, I had to play it whether I wanted to or not. "I'll play," I said finally, the words slipping out before I could stop them. I wasn't sure what had made me say it, but something inside me shifted in that moment. The game was no longer something I could ignore or resist. I was already too far gone. Nicholas's smile widened, as though he had been expecting me to say those very words. "Good," he said, his voice smooth and almost satisfied. "But remember, Lucy, once you're in, there's no turning back. The game has a way of revealing everything you're trying to hide." I didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. I couldn't quite grasp what was happening, but one thing was certain. There was no way out of this now. I had chosen, and with that choice, the next phase of the game would begin. As Nicholas turned to leave, he glanced over his shoulder, his voice carrying through the silence. "Meet me in the garden at midnight. The game truly begins then." I stood frozen in place, the weight of his words sinking in. Midnight. The start of whatever nightmare awaited me. I couldn't tell if I was ready. But one thing was clear. There was no going back. I was already lost in the game. Chapter 9. The Garden at Midnight. The minutes crawled by, stretching into what felt like hours as I tried to steady my breathing, my mind racing with questions, uncertainties, and a rising sense of dread. Midnight was approaching, and with it, the unknown. The mansion had taken on an eerie quietness, like the calm before a storm, and I found myself wandering through its halls, lost in thought. The light from the grand chandeliers was dim, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. The silence was almost suffocating, broken only by the sound of my footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. It felt as though the mansion itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I couldn't stop thinking about what Nicholas had said. The game. There was no turning back, no escaping it. The reflection in the mirror, Daniel's face filled with sorrow, the cold truth that had been laid bare. Everything felt like a jigsaw puzzle I couldn't complete. What had I done to get here? What was I even looking for in the first place? The garden at midnight. I had to go, had to follow through. Nicholas had made it clear that the next step in the game would unfold there, and I wasn't sure if I was prepared for whatever awaited me. But as much as I wanted to flee, a deeper part of me knew that I had already stepped too far into this labyrinth to turn around. The door to the outside was heavy, ancient, its wood worn with age, and when I pushed it open, the cold air hit me like a slap in the face. The garden stretched out before me, dark and vast, the outline of the hedges barely visible against the midnight sky. The moon was full, casting its pale light over the tangled branches of trees, the manicured hedges, and the stone pathways that wound through the overgrown foliage. The garden was beautiful, yes, but there was something unnervingly surreal about it. The beauty was shadowed by a sense of foreboding, as though it held secrets buried deep within its soil, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. I stepped out into the chill, my breath coming out in clouds as I walked down the gravel path, my footsteps muted by the thick grass beneath my feet. The garden was silent. No wind, no rustling of leaves, nothing to break the stillness of the night. The only sound was the rapid beating of my own heart, the sound of my own breath as I pushed forward, trying to calm the storm inside me. And then I saw him. Nicholas was standing near the far end of the garden, just outside the circle of light cast by the full moon. He was still, his dark figure blending almost seamlessly with the shadows. As I approached, his eyes locked onto mine, that same cold amusement dancing in them as though he were waiting for something. A response, a decision. "You came," he said, his voice low, the words almost a challenge. I didn't answer immediately, my thoughts tangled. There was something different about him now, something more dangerous in the way he stood there, calm and poised. He didn't move as I drew closer, didn't speak again until I was standing just a few feet away from him. "You know," Nicholas continued, his gaze sweeping over me, "you could have chosen to leave. You could have walked away, refused to play the game. But you didn't. Came. And now, Lucy, now we see what you're truly capable of." I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself, trying to make sense of it all. "I don't know what this is, Nicholas," I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. "I don't know what you want from me." A small smile played at the corners of his lips, but it wasn't kind. It was knowing, almost cruel. "What I want doesn't matter. Never did. What matters is what you want. The game is about revealing what lies beneath the surface. It's about uncovering who you really are." A chill ran down my spine at his words. "Who you really are." The phrase echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of everything I had tried to bury, everything I had tried to ignore. This game, whatever it was, wasn't just about me and Nicholas. It was about me and myself. The trees around us creaked in the silent wind, the shadows stretching longer, more menacing. Nicholas stepped closer, his presence more intense now, the space between us closing in a way that made my chest tighten. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Nicholas's gaze softened, but it wasn't a comforting softness. "Now, Lucy, we begin the second test." I felt my stomach drop. Another test. I had barely gotten through the first one. What could he possibly want from me now? He reached into the folds of his jacket and pulled out a small object, a box, its surface smooth and dark. He opened it slowly, and inside was something that made my breath catch in my throat, a key. "This is the key to your future," Nicholas said, his voice deadly serious. "But it's also a key to your past. I've given you everything to play this game, but there's a price, Lucy. A price that you'll have to pay if you continue." I stared at the key, the weight of his words sinking in. "A price?" Nicholas nodded, his expression unreadable. "Yes, price. One you may not be willing to pay." I reached out instinctively, my fingers brushing the cold metal of the key, but before I could touch it fully, Nicholas pulled it away, just out of reach. "Before you take this key, you must answer one question, Lucy." I looked up at him, my heart racing. "What question?" He tilted his head slightly, his smile returning, but this time there was something more sinister in it. "What are you willing to sacrifice?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt my breath catch in my chest, my mind scrambling for an answer I didn't have. What was I willing to sacrifice? I had already given up so much. My peace of mind, my sense of control, my safety, but this felt different. This felt like something that would cost me in ways I couldn't even begin to understand. Nicholas waited, his eyes dark and expectant, as the silence between us stretched on. The answer felt like it was right there, just beyond my reach, but I couldn't grasp it. I had no idea what the game wanted from me. But whatever it was, I knew it was something I couldn't take back. Chapter 10: The Final Choice. The moon hung low in the sky, casting its pale light across the garden. Every breath I took felt heavier, as though the weight of the question Nicholas had posed was pulling me deeper into something I couldn't escape. The key, now resting in his hand, gleamed cold and unyielding in the moonlight. "What are you willing to sacrifice?" The words echoed in my head like a drumbeat, growing louder, impossible to ignore. My mind raced, swirling with the endless possibilities. I had already sacrificed so much. My relationship with Daniel had crumbled beneath the weight of my own choices. I had come to this place, this mansion of mirrors and games, to find answers, but every step I took only seemed to lead me further into the unknown. The shadows of the garden stretched across the stone path, twisted and distorted, just like my thoughts. Nicholas stood in front of me, his gaze unwavering, as if he already knew my answer. As if he was testing me, waiting for me to confront the final truth of who I was. I don't know, I murmured, my voice barely a whisper. The fear in my chest had reached its peak, and I felt vulnerable, exposed. The darkness around me seemed to close in, and the weight of his question became unbearable. "What is the cost of the key?" Nicholas didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence looming, a dark force I couldn't escape. I could feel the intensity of his gaze, the calculated coldness in every movement. "Everything has a cost, Lucy," he said softly. "The game was never just about winning. It was about you facing the consequences of your actions, the choices you've made, the lies you've told, the parts of yourself you've tried to bury." I wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, but something in his voice held me back. He was right. Every choice I had made, every lie I had told to myself and to others, had led me here. The guilt, the betrayal, the secrets, they had all brought me to this moment, standing in a garden at midnight, confronted by the weight of my own decisions. I thought of Daniel, his face in the mirror, the pain in his eyes. I thought of my mother and father, long gone but still haunting my every step. The truth was, I had been running from all of it, from the mess I had made of my own life, from the relationships I had destroyed, from the person I had become. But now I had to face it. I reached for the key, trembling fingers brushing against its cold surface. It was heavier than I had expected, like it carried the weight of all the things I had done wrong. The cost wasn't just a price, it was a reckoning. Nicholas's eyes never left mine, waiting for me to make my choice. I knew deep down that there was no easy way out. The game had already begun, and I had already played my part. "I'm willing to sacrifice everything," I whispered, the words coming from a place I hadn't known existed within me. "I'm willing to face the truth. No more running." Nicholas's lips curled into a smile, but there was no warmth in it, only a cold satisfaction, like he had been waiting for me to say those words. He stepped back, offering me the key. "Then take it," he said, his voice low, filled with a finality I couldn't ignore. "It's yours. But remember, Lucy, the truth will set you free, only if you're ready to accept it." I took the key, feeling its cold weight settle into the palm of my hand. As soon as I gripped it, the world seemed to shift around me. The air grew still, and the sounds of the garden faded into an eerie silence. For a moment I felt suspended in time, caught between the past and the future. And then the mansion, the game, began to dissolve. The walls crumbled, the rooms fading away, as though they had never existed at all. The garden, the darkness, everything seemed to melt into nothingness. But in that moment I understood. The key hadn't just opened a door. It had opened me. It had unlocked the truth that had been buried deep inside. The truth about my choices, my regrets, my fears. I had faced it all. And in doing so, I had found something I hadn't even known I was searching for: peace. I turned the key in my hand, the weight of it suddenly lighter, as though the burden I had been carrying had finally been lifted. The game was over. The choices had been made. And in the end, the truth had set me free.